My stepfather tried to claim my property, then the lawyer exposed him. That was literally the headline playing in my head by the time I went to bed last night. But when the day started, I honestly thought it was just going to be another annoying family meeting about what's best for everyone. I'm Matt, I'm 32, and I live in Columbus, Ohio, in this small two-bedroom house my dad left me when he passed away 4 years ago. It's not fancy. The kitchen cabinets stick a little in the humidity, and the basement smells like dust and laundry detergent, but it's mine. I woke up yesterday around 7:30 a.m., made my usual crappy drip coffee, and scrolled through my phone trying to ignore the knot in my stomach from the text my mom had sent the night before. We need to talk about the house. Can you come to Mr. Callahan's office at 3? Mr. Callahan is the lawyer who handled my dad's will. I stared at those words over and over while the coffee machine rattled, already suspecting that whatever this was, it wasn't going to be good for me. The morning itself felt weirdly normal on the surface, which made the whole thing even more unsettling. It was gray outside, that kind of Ohio winter gray where the sky looks like a dirty t-shirt and the air feels damp even if it's not actually raining. I worked from home at my little IKEA desk in the corner of the living room, answering emails and sitting through a video meeting where my manager talked about Q1 priorities, while my brain kept drifting back to that text. Every time my phone lit up with a random notification, I felt this tiny jolt of panic, like maybe my mom was going to send a follow-up message explaining what talk about the house really meant. She didn't. No explanation, no context, nothing. Just silence, which, in my family, usually means someone is about to screw you over and they want you calm and compliant when it happens. Around 11 a.m., I finally pushed my chair back and just walked around the house for a minute, looking at the stupid little things that have my dad's fingerprints all over them. The dent on the hallway wall from when we tried to move his old recliner upstairs and misjudged the angle. The cheap ceiling fan in my bedroom he insisted on installing himself, even though the blades are slightly crooked and it clicks on the lowest setting. The framed photo of us at a minor league baseball game sitting on the TV stand, not even centered, because I never bothered to decorate like a normal adult. It all felt heavy, like the house wasn't just walls and a mortgage, but the last concrete proof that my dad existed and cared about me. The idea that my mom and her husband, Mark, might be planning something to mess with that made my chest feel tight in this dull, steady way. I should probably explain Mark a bit, because he's important to this whole mess. My mom remarried about 2 years after my dad died, which I tried to be supportive about, even though it felt fast to me. Mark is the kind of guy who talks loud in restaurants and calls waiters buddy, in this fake friendly way that makes your skin crawl. He works some sales job in industrial equipment, always bragging about commissions and closing deals, like every conversation is just a warm-up for a pitch. From the beginning, he had opinions about my finances, my career, my potential, even though he barely knew me. He'd make these little comments about how a house is an asset, not a shrine, and how equity shouldn't just sit there. My mom would tell him to drop it, but never in a way that really shut him down. It always felt like he was circling, waiting for a chance to sink his teeth into whatever my dad left me. So when my mom's text mentioned the lawyer and the house, my brain connected the dots pretty quickly. I spent lunch pushing cold leftover pizza around in the box and scrolling through old email threads from when the will was processed, just to reassure myself I wasn't crazy. The house was specifically left to me, not to my mom, not to the family, not to be sold and divided. To me by name. I even pulled the actual folder out of my bedroom closet, the one I keep in a shoebox with other important stuff like my birth certificate and my passport. The will was there, printed on off-white paper, with my dad's shaky signature at the bottom from when he was already sick. I read the paragraph about the house 3 times, silently mouthing the words, feeling that weird mix of comfort and dread. Comfort because it felt clear, dread because I knew Mark was the type of guy who didn't really care what my dad wanted if it got in the way of whatever he thought made sense. By early afternoon, the anxiety had turned into this low-level anger buzzing under my skin. I took a shower I didn't really need, mostly just to stand under hot water and try to clear my head. I could feel my jaw clenching, my shoulders tight, my stomach doing little flips. I kept replaying old conversations with Mark in my head, like the time he said, "You're lucky your dad set you up like this. Most people your age have nothing." It was the way he said set you up like I was some lazy trust fund kid instead of someone who watched their dad slowly waste away in a hospital bed. I remembered my mom sitting at our kitchen table 6 months after the funeral, crying over bills, and me offering to help with some of the insurance money I'd gotten, and her telling me, "No, your dad wanted you to have that. The house and that account are yours." I clung to that memory like a lifeline while I got dressed to go to the meeting. Jeans, decent sweater, clean sneakers. Nothing special, but at least I didn't look like I'd just rolled out of bed. The drive to Mr. Callahan's office didn't take long, maybe 15 minutes, but it felt like one of those drives where your brain is half on autopilot. His office is in this old brick building downtown, above a dentist's office and a bakery that always smells like sugar and butter, even in winter. The parking lot had patches of slushy snow pushed into dirty piles, and when I stepped out of my car, the air had that cold, metallic feel that makes your nose sting. I could see my mom's SUV already parked near the door, and next to it, Mark's huge black truck that he doesn't need for anything but ego. I just stood there for a second with my hand on my car door, breathing in the cold air, letting it burn a little in my lungs so I wouldn't walk in there already sounding pissed off. Inside, the building smelled like coffee, paper, and old carpet cleaner. I wiped my shoes on the mat and took the stairs up to the second floor, feeling my heartbeat pick up with each step. The hallway was quiet except for some muffled printer noise from another office. I could see the frosted glass door with Callahan and Associates in gold letters, and the light was on inside. When I opened the door, the little bell attached at the top gave that soft jingle I'd heard a few times before, once when we came to sign the original will. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair, looked up and smiled in that polite, neutral way. My mom was sitting on one of the lobby chairs, her purse on her lap, hands clenched around the straps. Mark was next to her, legs spread, scrolling on his phone like he owned the place. My mom stood up quickly when she saw me, smoothing her sweater like she'd just been caught doing something wrong. Mark just glanced up, nodded once, and went back to his phone. I sat in the chair across from them, my knees pointing slightly away, like my body was trying to maintain distance even in a 10 by 10 waiting room. Nobody said much at first. The TV in the corner was playing some daytime show with the volume low, just background noise. I could hear the receptionist typing. My mom asked if I hit much traffic, and I gave a one-word answer because I didn't trust myself to say more without sounding hostile. Mark eventually put his phone away and started doing that thing where he cracks his knuckles one by one, a habit that makes my skin crawl because he always does it right before he says something he knows people won't like. After a few minutes that felt way longer than they were, Mr. Callahan came out from the back, holding a thin manila folder. He's in his early 60s, I think, with those glasses that are always halfway down his nose and a kind of calm, slow way of moving, like nothing ever really surprises him. He shook my hand, then my mom's, then Mark's, though with Mark it was more of a polite formality. "Come on back," he said, and we followed him down the short hallway into his office. I'd been in there before. Dark wooden desk, 2 filing cabinets, a small conference table with 4 chairs, and a window that looks out over the parking lot. On the table, there were a couple of bottled waters, a legal pad, and that folder he was carrying, now set neatly in front of him as we sat down. The seating arrangement ended up weirdly symbolic. My mom in the chair to Mr. Callahan's right, Mark next to her, and me on his left, slightly apart, like we were already on opposing sides without anyone saying it out loud. I could feel the edge of the chair digging into the back of my thighs, and I had to force myself to keep my hands flat on the table instead of crossing my arms. Mr. Callahan cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and glanced between the 3 of us. My mom looked nervous, like she wanted to reach across the table and touch my hand, but knew Mark was watching. Mark had his serious business face on, the one he uses when he talks about deals and investments. I just waited, trying to keep my breathing even, staring at that manila folder like it was a bomb. Mr. Callahan started by saying he was glad we could all be there and that he wanted to clarify some things regarding my father's estate, specifically the property I was living in. The way he said clarify made my stomach twist, because in my experience, people only want to clarify things when they're about to tell you how you've misunderstood something that's actually about to screw you. My mom shifted in her seat. Mark leaned forward slightly, and I felt my jaw clench hard enough that I had to deliberately relax it. Mr. Callahan opened the folder and pulled out a few papers, stacking them in a neat pile. I recognized the top page as a copy of my dad's original will, the same one I'd just been looking at in my bedroom. Then Mark jumped in, because of course he did. He started talking about long-term financial planning and how it doesn't make sense for an unmarried guy in his early 30s to sit on a property when that equity could be working for the family. He used that word a lot, family, like it automatically included him in every decision about my dad's things. My mom tried to soften it by saying they were just exploring options and that this meeting was about being practical. I sat there listening, feeling my pulse in my ears, while they laid out this idea that basically boiled down to them wanting me to sign some agreement so the house could be retitled for flexibility. They kept using vague phrases like that, as if the actual words, "give up your ownership," would burn their tongues. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a conversation. They'd come here with a plan. Mr. Callahan didn't jump in right away to agree with them, which is probably the only reason I didn't completely lose it on the spot. Instead, he listened, hands folded, letting Mark talk himself in circles about leveraging the asset and protecting the family's position. I noticed he kept saying we and our when referring to the house, like it was some shared project we were all involved in, not the place I'd been paying the utilities, property taxes, and repairs on by myself for years. My mom kept nodding along in these small, hesitant movements, like she wasn't fully sold, but also wasn't going to contradict her husband in front of the lawyer. The air in the room felt stuffy and dry, and I could smell that faint mix of old coffee and printer toner that always hangs in offices like that. I took a sip of water from the bottle in front of me just to have something to do with my hands, and my fingers left little condensation streaks on the label because my palms were sweating. When it was finally my turn to speak, I didn't say anything dramatic. I just said, as evenly as I could, that the house was left to me and that I didn't understand what exactly they were asking me to do. I asked them to be specific. For a second, nobody answered. Mark looked at my mom like he expected her to handle it, and she stared down at the table where there was a faint scratch in the wood running diagonally across her reflection in the polished surface. Mr. Callahan cleared his throat and slid another document from the folder, turning it so it was facing me. It wasn't the will. It was something else, several pages stapled together, with my name typed in a couple of places, and some legalese about transferring interest and authorizing sale. There was a bright yellow sticky note attached to the top page with my name written in blue ink. That's when the buzzing in my head got louder, because this wasn't just a conversation. They'd already prepared paperwork assuming I would go along. I skimmed the first page, not a lawyer, but not completely stupid either. The basic idea was that I would agree to sign over partial ownership of the house into some kind of shared family trust for estate planning purposes, which would give my mom and, by extension, Mark a say in what happened to it. There was language about how any future sale would result in proceeds being distributed according to agreed-upon percentages. I asked what those percentages were, and Mark jumped on that like he'd been waiting. He started talking about how my mom had invested in the house over the years by helping pay for some repairs before I took over full responsibility, how he'd supported her financially, and how it was only fair that she had a stake. He threw out numbers like 60-40 or 50-50 like this was a negotiation over fantasy football and not my dad's last major asset. My mom kept saying variations of, "We just want to make sure everyone is taken care of down the line," but she wouldn't look me straight in the eye. It got tense fast, not in a screaming way, but in that quiet, suffocating way where everyone's voices stay calm while the meaning underneath gets sharper. I asked Mark point blank why this was coming up now, after 4 years of me living there, paying everything, handling every broken pipe and leaky window. He launched into some story about current market conditions and timing, saying the housing market was still favorable and that we'd be missing an opportunity if we waited. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor, like I should be grateful someone was thinking strategically. I could feel this heat spreading from my chest up into my neck, the way it does when I'm trying not to say something I can't take back. Mr. Callahan finally stepped in enough to say that no one could force me to sign anything, and that the will clearly left the property to me, but there was this careful neutrality in his tone, like he was walking a line between being my dad's old lawyer and not wanting to get dragged into a family fight. The moment it really started sliding off the rails was when I mentioned that I still had a copy of the will at home and that I'd just read it that afternoon. I said I didn't remember any mention of a trust or shared ownership, and I asked Mr. Callahan to confirm if I was missing something. He tapped the will with his index finger and said, firmly this time, that no, I wasn't missing anything. The property was left to me outright, with no stipulations beyond the usual legal stuff. Mark's jaw tightened in this tiny way, and he shifted back in his chair. My mom's face went a little pale, and she reached for her water bottle but didn't actually unscrew the cap, just held it like she needed something solid in her hand. You could feel the shift in the room, like whatever they'd hoped Mr. Callahan might say to back them up wasn't happening, and their plan suddenly wasn't as straightforward as they'd hoped. Instead of backing off, Mark doubled down. He started talking about how estates evolve, and how sometimes adjustments need to be made after the fact to reflect reality. He mentioned that my mom had been the one dealing with hospital bills and funeral costs and emotional fallout, which was honestly insulting because I was there for all of that too. He hinted that my dad hadn't really intended for me to isolate myself in the house long term, like I was some moody teenager camping in a shrine instead of an adult paying a mortgage. Then he casually dropped something that made my stomach drop. He said there were other documents that could be interpreted as my dad wanting the house to benefit the whole family, and that maybe my interpretation of the will was too narrow. It felt like he'd just opened a door I didn't even know existed, one that led to a hallway full of things I'd never seen. I turned to Mr. Callahan and asked what other documents Mark was talking about. My voice came out tighter than I wanted, but I kept it steady enough. Mr. Callahan looked genuinely puzzled for the first time all afternoon, like someone had just handed him a puzzle piece from the wrong box. He asked Mark, very calmly, what he meant. Mark shifted in his seat and said something about a letter my dad had supposedly written, expressing his wishes that the property be used for the benefit of the family unit. My mom flinched slightly at the word letter, just a little twitch in her shoulders, and that was all it took for my brain to start connecting things. I had never seen any letter. No one had ever mentioned any additional instructions beyond the will. If something like that existed, why was I hearing about it for the first time, for years later, in a meeting I'd been invited to by text less than 24 hours earlier? My mom finally spoke up more directly then, probably realizing this wasn't going how she'd imagined. She said that my dad had written something toward the end, that he'd talked to her about wanting everyone to be supported, and that she and Mark had been holding on to it until the right time. It was the way she said holding on to it that made my skin crawl a little, because it sounded less like she'd been honoring a wish and more like she'd been sitting on a card she could play when it suited her. Mr. Callahan asked if they had brought this letter, and Mark said no. It was at home in a safe place, like that proved anything. Mr. Callahan frowned slightly, a tiny crease between his eyebrows that I'd never seen before, and said he didn't recall ever being given any such letter to incorporate into the estate planning. He made a note on his legal pad with a black pen, the scratching sound weirdly loud in the quiet room. That's when my internal anger shifted into something colder. Up until that point, I'd been bracing for an argument about fairness or money, something crappy but straightforward. The mention of a letter no one had seen and the way my mom reacted made it feel slimier, like there was a layer of secrecy I hadn't even suspected. I asked my mom, as calmly as I could, why she hadn't mentioned this before. Why not at the funeral? Why not when we first read the will? Why not when I moved into the house? She stumbled over her words, saying she didn't want to burden me when I was grieving, that she thought I needed stability first, that it never felt like the right moment. All I heard was that she'd been fine with me taking on all the responsibility while she held on to some mysterious document that might help justify taking it away from me later, once it was convenient. The more she talked, the messier it became. She admitted that she and Mark had discussed the letter several times over the past couple of years, especially when money got tight for them. She mentioned needing to replace their roof last year, some medical bills, and how it felt unfair that there was so much value in my house while they were struggling. Mark chimed in to say he'd been patient, but that eventually you have to take action instead of just letting circumstances control you. It was like listening to people talk about moving pieces on a board game instead of acknowledging that those pieces were my life and my dad's last decisions. I could feel my hands starting to shake under the table, so I curled them into fists against my thighs where no one could see. Mr. Callahan, to his credit, didn't let the conversation drift entirely into emotional manipulation. He asked again, more firmly, to clarify whether this supposed letter was signed, dated, and whether my dad had been of sound mind when he wrote it. My mom nodded quickly, answering yes to everything, but she looked rattled, like she hadn't expected to have to provide details. Mark said my dad wrote it not long before he passed, which immediately raised red flags in my mind because I remember those last weeks being a blur of pain meds and hospital visits. The idea that my dad sat down in that state and wrote some clear, legally meaningful letter about the house felt off. Not impossible, but off. Mr. Callahan said that if such a document existed, he would need to review it himself before making any statements about its relevance, and that for now, the only binding directive he could speak to was the will he drafted and filed. The tension in the room at that point felt heavy enough to touch. My mom's eyes were shiny like she might cry, but nothing actually fell. She kept adjusting the bracelet on her wrist, spinning it around and around. Mark's face had gone a little red, and he started tapping one finger against the table in this impatient rhythm. I just sat there, feeling weirdly like I was floating slightly above my own body, watching this whole scene from the ceiling. I asked one more time, very slowly, what exactly they wanted me to do today, in this moment. Not someday, not down the line. Today. Mark said he wanted me to sign the trust agreement so we could move forward as a united front. My mom murmured something about showing we're a family. Mr. Callahan said I could take the documents home to review or refuse to sign altogether. And that's when something in me just clicked from confusion to clarity in a way I didn't see coming. When that clarity hit, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some internal movie moment. It was more like the feeling you get when a foggy windshield finally clears enough for you to see the road again. I realized I didn't need to argue or prove anything or match Mark's energy. I just needed to stop playing along with this setup. So I leaned back slightly, folded my hands on the table, and said I wasn't signing anything. Not today, not later, not ever. My voice came out steady in a way that surprised even me. My mom let out this tiny sound, almost like she'd swallowed wrong, and Mark's head snapped toward me in this sharp, irritated jog of movement. He asked why I'd come at all if I wasn't willing to be reasonable, and I told him I came because my mom asked me to, and because I wanted to hear what this was. Now that I had, there was nothing more to talk about. Mark started raising his voice, not yelling, but getting louder in that way people do when they think volume equals authority. He said I was being emotional, short-sighted, selfish. All the classic hits. My mom tried to smooth it over, saying maybe we could revisit the idea in a few months after things settle, which made me want to laugh because nothing was unsettled except their plan falling apart. I just kept repeating, calmly, that the house was mine and that my dad's will was clear. I wasn't angry anymore, not the hot, shaky kind. It was something colder, almost peaceful, the kind of calm that comes when you stop caring about someone's approval and start protecting your own boundaries. And in that calm, I noticed something I might have missed otherwise. Mr. Callahan had gone very still, studying Mark with a kind of quiet, professional suspicion. Then Mr. Callahan asked a question that shifted the room like a sudden drop in air pressure. He asked Mark to describe the letter. Not its content, its physical form. What kind of paper was it written on? Was it handwritten or typed? Was the signature the same as the one on the will? Was it notarized? Was anyone present when my dad wrote it? He asked these questions slowly, one by one, and Mark's answers got weirdly vague. My mom jumped in to help, but her version didn't match his. Mark said it was typed. My mom said handwritten. Mark said he wasn't sure about notarization. My mom said she thought so, but couldn't remember. Mr. Callahan wrote everything down, nodding, but his eyes had narrowed just slightly. I'd seen that look before when he was reviewing documents for my dad. He only made that face when something didn't add up. That's when Mr. Callahan asked the question that made the entire room freeze. He asked, very gently, almost casually, whether the letter had been drafted with assistance. Mark hesitated just long enough for the silence to feel strange. He said something about helping type it up because my mom isn't great with technology and my dad had trouble sitting upright for long periods. My stomach flipped at that. Not because typing a letter for someone is automatically suspicious, but because of the timing. My dad could barely hold a pen those last weeks. He drifted in and out of awareness. The idea that he dictated some clear, legally meaningful document in that state while Mark typed it up, it felt wrong in my bones. Mr. Callahan didn't accuse anyone. He didn't raise his voice or act dramatic. He just sat back, folded his hands, and said that if such a document existed, it would need to undergo verification, including handwriting analysis if the signature was handwritten, and medical review for capacity if the timing matched the final weeks of my dad's illness. He said all of this in the same calm tone you'd use to explain the weather. My mom looked like someone had quietly removed the floor beneath her. Mark's expression went flat, then tight, then annoyed, like he'd been expecting Mr. Callahan to just rubber stamp whatever story they brought in. That was the moment everything shifted. The room didn't explode, but the energy cracked. Mark accused Mr. Callahan of overcomplicating things. Mr. Callahan responded that he had ethical responsibilities. My mom whispered, "This wasn't supposed to be like this," in this small, breaking voice that made it clear she knew the letter wasn't going to hold up under scrutiny. And me? I just sat there and watched the mess unfold, feeling oddly detached, like I'd walked into the version of reality everyone had been trying to hide from me. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, a sharp, ugly sound. He said they were wasting time, and that they'd bring the letter later. But the way he said it made it clear he knew it wouldn't change anything. My mom stood up too, slower, like her legs weren't steady. She avoided my eyes completely. Mr. Callahan told me, very matter-of-factly, that I should not sign anything, and that if they produced a document, I should bring it directly to him before discussing it with anyone else. His voice carried this quiet weight that made me feel protected for the first time all day. We all stood there in this weird, crooked triangle. Mark had this restless energy, grabbing his coat, checking his phone like he wanted to be anywhere but there. My mom clutched her purse strap so tightly her knuckles were white. I just took a breath and waited, letting the silence stretch. Mark muttered something about ungrateful kids under his breath as he walked past me, but I didn't respond. For once, his words didn't burrow under my skin. The walk back down the hallway felt surreal. My mom stopped before the door, finally turning to look at me. Her eyes were red, but there was something else there too. Guilt, maybe, or fear, or just the weight of realizing she'd let someone manipulate her into doing something she couldn't defend. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but Mark called her name from the stairs, and she flinched and left without saying a word. I stayed behind in the lobby for a moment, just to breathe. The receptionist asked if I needed anything, and I said no, I was fine, even though my hands were shaking. Mr. Callahan walked out a minute later and told me to call him if anything else came up. He put a hand on my shoulder in this brief, steady way that grounded me. Then he went back inside, leaving me standing there in the quiet, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint sound of traffic outside. When I finally stepped out into the parking lot, the air felt colder but cleaner, like stepping out of a stuffy room into winter sunlight. My car windows were fogged on the inside from the temperature difference, so I sat there for a second while the defroster kicked on, staring at the blurry shapes of my mom's SUV and Mark's truck pulling out. They didn't look back. I didn't expect them to. By the time I started driving home, the emotional crash hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like the kind of exhaustion you feel after holding your breath for way too long, only to finally exhale and realize how tight your whole body had been. I kept replaying the meeting in my head, analyzing every look my mom gave Mark, every hesitation, every mismatch in their stories. I kept wondering when exactly things had shifted so far that she would walk into a lawyer's office with paperwork ready to take something my dad had specifically wanted me to have. The sky was still that heavy gray, and the roads had patches of slush that hissed under the tires. The air inside the car smelled faintly like the travel mug of coffee I'd forgotten to wash yesterday. It was all so ordinary, but I felt like a different person than the one who'd opened his eyes that morning. When I got home, the house felt strange, familiar, but edged with a new kind of meaning. I dropped my keys onto the little metal tray on the entry shelf, and the sound echoed more sharply than usual. I walked through the living room, touching the back of the couch, the corner of the dining table, the chipped tile near the kitchen doorway. These were all things I'd passed 1,000 times, but after the meeting, they felt like proof. Proof that I'd built my life in this space. Proof that I'd kept up the place my dad trusted me with. Even the faint smell of old wood and heating dust felt grounding, like the house itself was reminding me I wasn't crazy for defending it. I went into my bedroom and pulled the will back out of the shoebox, smoothing the page with my palm. My dad's signature looked steadier here than in my memory, and for the first time that day, I felt something warm in my chest instead of just anger. I sat on the edge of my bed for a while, letting everything settle. The quiet of the house felt heavier after the tension at the office, but not in a bad way. I could hear the faint hum of the furnace kicking on, the soft crack sound of the wood frame adjusting to the temperature. I took a few slow breaths and realized something that took me off guard. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of losing the house, not of another confrontation with Mark, not of being blindsided again. I'd seen the whole play, start to finish. I'd watched it crumble in real time. And the most telling part wasn't anything Mark said, it was the way my mom reacted. The guilt in her eyes. The way she couldn't keep her story straight. The way she'd let someone else steer her into a decision she couldn't defend for even 5 minutes under scrutiny. That realization hurt, but it also made the situation feel clearer than it had all day. At some point I got up and fixed myself something to eat. Not real food, just a microwave burrito and a handful of chips, but enough to settle the knot in my stomach. I stood at the kitchen counter eating, staring at the magnetic notepad on the fridge where I kept track of bills. Property tax due date, water bill, electric, trash pickup schedule. Every single line was written in my handwriting. Every item was something I'd handled alone. It wasn't about proving anything to them, but in that moment, it felt like tangible evidence of the reality they kept pretending didn't exist. I wiped the crumbs off the counter with a paper towel and threw the wrapper away, listening to the soft thud it made when it hit the trash can. Simple things, but they steadied me. I spent the rest of the afternoon in this strange limbo, half calm, half wired, waiting for the next shoe to drop. I kept expecting my phone to buzz with some angry message from Mark or a long, emotional text from my mom. It didn't. Nothing. Just silence. I walked around the house checking things without really planning to, flipping light switches, checking the back door lock, opening and closing the bathroom cabinet. It wasn't fear that made me do it. It was this odd instinct, like I needed to reclaim the space, remind myself it was mine. At one point I ended up in the basement, staring at the old tool shelf my dad kept. The smell of concrete and faint gasoline from the lawn mower lingered in the air. I touched the handle of his rust-speckled hammer and felt my throat tighten for a few seconds. Not from grief exactly. More like gratitude that he'd made things so clear when he still could. When evening rolled around, the sky darkened early like it does in winter, and the street outside looked washed out and quiet under the orange glow of the streetlights. I made another cup of coffee, not because I needed caffeine, but because the ritual gave my hands something to do. I sat at the kitchen table with the will in front of me, reading it again word for word. I remembered how sick my dad had been near the end, how even signing his name took effort. The idea that he drafted some second letter with complex instructions just didn't track. And the fact that my mom had never shown it to anyone, not the lawyer, not me, said more than anything written on a page could. Whatever the truth was, the so-called letter didn't exist in any way that mattered legally. And deep down, I suspected it didn't exist at all. Around 7 p.m., my cousin Tyler called. We don't talk often, just holidays and the occasional meme exchange, but he'd heard from my aunt that my mom was upset about something today and figured it might involve me. I didn't give him the whole story, just the broad strokes. He let out a long breath and said none of it surprised him. He told me he'd seen how Mark talked about my dad's things at gatherings, like he was mentally bookmarking assets. Tyler said something that stuck with me. People like him don't think about relationships. They think about leverage. Hearing someone else say it out loud made the whole day feel less surreal. Tyler told me I should stand my ground and that he had my back if things escalated. It wasn't dramatic or heroic, just this quiet reassurance from someone who actually knew what my dad meant to me. After I hung up, I went outside for a minute, standing on the small concrete step by the back door. The air smelled like cold pavement and distant chimney smoke from another house on the block. I could see my breath in the air, little clouds drifting away into the dark. For the first time all day, I felt something like relief. Not because everything was solved, but because the worst part, being caught off guard, was over. I now understood the whole situation, the angles, the pressure points, the motivations. I wasn't flailing anymore. I knew exactly where I stood and exactly what I was willing to do to protect what was mine. When I went back inside, I locked the door behind me, flipped off the kitchen light, and walked down the hallway toward my bedroom. I paused for a second by the photo of my dad on the TV stand. I didn't say anything out loud. I don't do that. But I rested my hand on the frame for a moment. It felt steady, grounded, real. Then I went to bed, not completely at peace, but with a sense of control I hadn't had that morning. The house creaked softly in the cold, and instead of feeling unsettled, it felt protective in a way I can't fully describe. The next morning would bring its own fallout, but as I lay there listening to the quiet, I finally felt certain about one thing. No matter what Mark tried, he wasn't getting this house. And for the first time in a long time, that certainty felt like enough.